The rain in Portland didn't fall. It hung in the air like a heavy, breathing physical weight. It smelled of wet asphalt and cedar dust, settling into the bones of my workshop and dulling the bite of my Japanese pull saw. I was adjusting the blade of a block plane, testing the iron against my thumb, when the heavy steel door of the shop rattled in its frame. A silhouette stood on the other side of the frosted glass, shivering under the halo of the street lamp. It wasn't a client. Clients didn't show up at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night during a flash flood warning. I set the plane down on the workbench, aligning it perfectly parallel to the edge out of habit, and pulled the heavy deadbolt back. The wind ripped the door from my grip. Sadie Jenkins stood there, soaked to the skin, clutching a canvas duffel bag like it was a life raft. She was Amelia's older sister, 7 years my senior, 35, and usually an unshakable fortress of independence. Right now, her teeth were chattering so hard I could hear them over the rain. I didn't ask questions. I grabbed the strap of her bag, pulled her inside the dry heat of the shop, and put my weight against the door to force it shut against the gale. The sudden silence in the room was absolute. "My ceiling caved in," she said, her voice shaking. She wiped wet hair out of her eyes, leaving a smudge of dirt across her forehead. "Vance wouldn't pick up the emergency line. The water is ankle deep. I needed somewhere to go that wasn't a shelter." I pulled a clean shop towel from the dispenser and handed it to her. "You're here. You're safe. Dry off." I turned my back, giving her privacy to breathe, and walked over to the breaker box to double-check the surge protectors for my heavy machinery. Amelia had walked out of my life 6 months ago, claiming my world was too quiet, too covered in sawdust. Sadie had never judged me for it. She just needed a roof. I had one. The complication didn't matter when the reality was a person freezing in my doorway. The next morning, the storm had knocked out the power grid for the entire block, plunging the attached studio apartment above my shop into a dim grey chill. Theo Ortega, my shop manager, was already downstairs with a flashlight, checking the seals on the loading bay doors. "You've got a guest," Theo noted quietly, shining his beam on the spare boots I'd left by the stairs for her. "Amelia's sister," I said, checking the moisture content of a stack of raw walnut with a digital meter. Her place flooded. "Vance's building on 4th, Theo grimaced. "That guy is a shark. He uses structural failures to force tenants out, slaps some paint on, and doubles the rent. He handed eviction notices to 3 people last month for renovations after their pipes burst." I tightened my grip on the meter. Vance. The name left a bad taste in my mouth. I climbed the stairs to the loft. Sadie was awake, sitting at the small kitchen table, staring at a damp folder of illustration contracts. Her hands were gripping a mug of cold coffee I'd left out for her earlier. The power was out, meaning the heating system was dead. She was wearing 2 sweaters, her shoulders curled inward. "I have to go back," she whispered, not looking up. "My drafting tablet is still there. If Vance claims abandonment—" "You aren't going into a flooded unit with compromised wiring," I said, my voice low but firm. I set a heavy cast-iron lantern on the table and sparked it. The warm yellow light pushed the shadows back. "I'll go." "Jackson, no, you don't have to." "I have the boots, the gloves, and I know how to pull a main breaker safely." I didn't wait for her to argue. I grabbed my heavy Carhartt jacket. "Write down exactly where the tablet is." By noon, the rain had turned into a steady, freezing drizzle. I stood in Sadie's ruined apartment. The drywall ceiling had collapsed, insulation scattered across the floor like dirty snow. The smell of mold was already blooming. I found her drafting tablet wrapped in a trash bag on a high shelf, miraculously dry. As I stepped back out into the hallway, Vance was there. He was a man who wore expensive suits that didn't fit, holding a clipboard like a weapon. "No entry," Vance barked, stepping into my path. "Property is condemned pending inspection. She has 48 hours to clear her remaining trash before I change the locks."
48 hours isn't a lawful notice in this state for a displaced tenant, I said, keeping my voice entirely level. I didn't cross my arms, I just stood my ground, my work boots planted on the linoleum. You need 30 days, and you're liable for her relocation costs due to negligence on a structural roof leak. Vance sneered. "Are you a lawyer? Carpenter? I know load-bearing limits, and I know rot when I smell it. That roof has been failing for 2 years. I held up my phone, screen glowing. I documented the joists before I pulled her gear. It's structural neglect. Try to lock her out, and those photos go to the housing board." Vance's jaw tightened, but he took a step back. I walked past him, keeping my eyes forward. I had bought her time. When I returned to the shop, the power had flickered back on. Sadie was sitting on the edge of the sofa in my loft, staring at her hands. I set the drafting tablet on the table gently. She let out a shaky exhale, the tension dropping from her shoulders so fast she almost slumped. "He's giving you 30 days, I said quietly, taking off my wet boots. "But you shouldn't go back there. You can use the loft until you find a place." "I can't impose, Jackson. Amelia isn't here," I interrupted, my tone softening. "You are. The space is empty. Use it." Over the next 3 weeks, a quiet routine settled over the loft. She worked at the small table, her stylus scratching softly against the screen. I worked downstairs, the rhythmic hum of the jointer acting as white noise. We didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't heavy. It was functional. One evening, I noticed the wooden chair she used at the table had a loose spindle. It made her shift uncomfortably every few minutes. I didn't point it out. When she went to sleep, I carried the chair downstairs. I carefully knocked the joint apart, cleaned out the old, brittle glue, applied a fresh coat of high-strength wood adhesive, and clamped it perfectly square. I left it back at her table before sunrise. When she sat down the next morning, the chair was rock solid. She paused, running her hand over the repaired joint, and looked down at the shop door. She didn't say thank you. She just smiled, a small, genuine thing that made my chest tighten. The fragile piece shattered on a Thursday. I was drafting a blueprint for a custom credenza when I heard the heavy, rapid thud of footsteps on the stairs. Sadie appeared in the doorway of the shop, clutching a piece of heavy stock paper. Her face was pale. "He served it," she said, her voice hollow. "Vance. Official eviction. Lease termination due to extensive remodel requirements. He dated it retroactively. He says I have to be completely out by Monday, or he seizes the deposit and the rest of my equipment." I set my pencil down. The graphite snapped. "Show me." I took the paper. It was thick with legal jargon, designed to panic someone who didn't know the system. It was a pressure tactic. I looked at Sadie.
Her hands were trembling. She had been fighting for her independence for years, scraping by on freelance work, and one greedy landlord was trying to erase it with a pen stroke. "I have a commission due Tuesday," she whispered, leaning against the doorframe. "If I spend the weekend fighting him or moving heavy furniture, I miss the deadline. I lose the client." "You aren't missing the deadline," I said. I walked over to the large whiteboard where I tracked my lumber shipments. I grabbed a marker and drew a hard line down the middle. "We map it out. Step 1. You finish the commission here. Step 2. I secure a truck for Saturday. Step 3. We counterfile with the City Housing Authority for illegal retroactive dating." "Jackson, this isn't your fight." "You're in my shop," I replied, holding her gaze. "That makes it my fight." That night, the temperature dropped sharply. The old radiators in the loft clanked and hissed, struggling to push heat into the room. I was sleeping on the folding cot I'd set up in the corner of the drafting room, having given her my bed. I woke up to the sound of rain hammering the glass. The shop was dark, save for the amber glow of the street lamp outside. I heard a soft rustle. Sadie was standing in the doorway of the drafting room, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. "I can't sleep," she whispered. The silence of the room amplified the raw exhaustion in her voice. "Radiator too loud?" I asked, sitting up slowly, making sure to keep my distance. "No, it's just quiet." She walked over and sat on the edge of the cot, leaving a respectable foot of space between us. I didn't move. I kept my hands resting flat on my knees, actively anchoring myself. "Amelia used to say this place felt like a tomb," Sadie said softly, staring at the floorboards. "She said you were too still, too focused on things that didn't move." "I fix things," I said simply. "Sometimes that takes stillness." Sadie turned her head. In the dim light, I could see the fatigue under her eyes, but also a sharp, striking clarity. "I've spent my whole life running, hustling for clients, fighting landlords, trying to prove to my family I didn't need a corporate job. I'm so tired of moving, Jackson." She shifted closer. Just an inch. The air between us didn't heat up. It solidified. It felt like the sudden, absolute grip of a dovetail joint locking into place. Complete structural stability. "I thought my ex's sister just needed a place to crash," I said, the words quiet, a confession to the dark room. Sadie looked at me, her eyes reflecting the amber light, until she lay beside you in the dark and said, "Show me what she gave up." The request wasn't a demand for passion. It was a plea for a sanctuary. She was asking to see the safety her sister had discarded because it was boring. I didn't pull her into my arms. I didn't cross the boundary. Instead, I reached out and let my hand rest lightly over hers on the blanket. A transfer of stability. The tremor in her fingers stopped instantly. "She gave up someone who stays," I said. We sat there for an hour, listening to the rain, my hand over hers, until her breathing slowed and she finally found rest. The final confrontation happened on Monday morning inside the sterile, fluorescent-lit office of the City Housing Authority. Vance was sitting at the mediator's table, looking bored, tapping a gold pen against his legal pad. Sadie sat next to me. Her spine was perfectly straight. She wasn't shaking anymore. "The tenant abandoned the property," Vance stated to the mediator, not even looking at Sadie. The lease termination is standard. I didn't abandon it, Sadie said, her voice ringing clear and authoritative across the room. She slid a thick bound folder across the table. I evacuated an unsafe structure. Here are the time-stamped photos of the neglected joists, the mold growth present before the storm, and the retroactive notice you slipped under the door. Vance frowned, reaching for the folder. These photos mean nothing without an expert assessment. I placed a certified envelope on top of the folder. I'm a licensed master carpenter, I said, my voice cutting through the hum of the air conditioner. My structural assessment was filed with the city engineer this morning. The rot is 3 years deep. You knew about it. Vance's pen stopped tapping. He looked at the seal on the envelope, then at me. The bravado drained out of his posture, replaced by the cold calculus of a man realizing he was trapped. Sadie didn't let him speak. She leaned forward, claiming her own victory. I'm not fighting to stay in your building, Mr. Vance. I'm fighting for the breach of contract. You will release my deposit in full today. You will waive the final month's rent, and you will sign this mutual release form terminating the lease without penalty on my record. If you don't, Jackson's report goes to the safety inspectors, and they'll red tag your entire property. She had negotiated her own exit. She didn't need me to save her. She just needed the tools to build her own defense. Vance stared at the paperwork for a long, bitter moment. Then he uncapped his pen and signed the release. We walked out of the building into the crisp, rain-washed Portland air. Sadie stopped on the sidewalk. She looked down at the signed release in her hand, then looked up at me. We need to pack the rest of your studio, I said, calculating the timeline. I can take the heavy boxes down the fire escape. Jackson, she said softly, reaching out. She didn't grab my arm, she just caught my fingers. I don't want to look for a new apartment. I froze. I looked down at our hands. My loft is small. The radiators are loud. The loft is safe, she corrected, stepping squarely into my space. She looked up, no hesitation, no hiding. And the man who lives downstairs knows exactly how to build things that last. It was a public choice. Right there on the sidewalk, with commuters rushing past us, she was claiming the space, and she was claiming me. I felt the last lingering ghost of my past failure evaporate. I leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't frantic, and it wasn't a spark. It was the heavy, grounding drop of an anchor hitting the sea floor. A seal on a contract that didn't need ink. A final arrival. When I pulled back, she was smiling, her thumb resting gently against my jaw. The void was gone. I had spent my life fixing broken things for other people, but looking at Sadie, I realized I had finally built a foundation for myself. Closing thoughts. I learned that winning the wrong way is actually losing, and true victory is sleeping with a clear conscience. Healthy love isn't about drama, it's about consistency, safety, and showing up. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.